Sarah never imagined that her first love could turn into a lie. When she finds out, through an anonymous message, that Logan cheated on her in a hotel room, her world comes crashing down. In search of answers, and maybe even revenge, she meets Cole Whitmore, a billionaire CEO with a gaze that seems to know more than it should. What seemed like a simple distraction soon turns into something far more dangerous and seductive. But what happened next? No one there was prepared to discover. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments. Where are you listening from? Your support helps us keep creating stories like this. Sarah, a 22-year-old college student, independent and sensitive, was living her life with a clear vision of the future. She had a steady boyfriend, Logan, with whom she had shared almost 2 years of memories. She was ready to take the next step, dreaming of a life with him, one filled with love and shared dreams. Logan was the man she thought she would share her first time with, the man she had trusted with her heart. But everything she thought she knew came crashing down in a single moment. It was a typical afternoon. Sarah, immersed in her studies, trying to keep up with the workload, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number, with no name attached. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it, unaware that this simple action would change everything. I saw Logan. He's in room 211 at the hotel. He's with another woman. The words blurred in front of her. Her heart stopped. She reread the message, her mind struggling to process what she was reading. Could this be true? Was it a mistake? Maybe a cruel joke? But the more she tried to dismiss it, the more real it seemed. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed her coat, her heart racing as she rushed out of her apartment and into the cold evening air. She had to see for herself. She had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The hotel was just a few blocks away. As she walked through the lobby, her steps heavy, her mind spinning, Sarah found herself hesitating at the elevator. What was she about to do? What if this was all a mistake? But deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her gut. The elevator doors opened, and Sarah stepped out on the second floor. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and each step toward room 211 felt like 1,000 miles. She stood in front of the door for a moment, taking a deep breath, before her trembling hand reached for the doorknob. It was as if time stood still. She hesitated, and then, without another thought, she pushed the door open. The scene before her was one that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Logan, the man she had loved so deeply, was in bed with another woman. His hands were tangled in her hair, their bodies entangled in a way that broke Sarah's heart in 1,000 pieces. For a long moment, she stood there, frozen in shock. Her chest tightened, her breathing became shallow, and her eyes filled with tears. The man who had promised her so much, the one who had been her first love, was now the source of her deepest betrayal. Without a word, without a second thought, Sarah turned and fled the room. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her heart felt like it was being torn apart as she rushed down the hallway, desperate to escape the scene that had shattered everything. She stumbled into the hotel bar, her mind still reeling. Her hands were shaking as she ordered a drink, hoping the alcohol would numb the pain, even just for a moment. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to face the world outside that seemed so empty now. She just wanted to disappear. As she sat at the bar, her thoughts swirling in a haze of hurt and disbelief, a voice broke through the fog. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah turned toward the voice. Her eyes locked with his. Cole Whitmore, a man she hadn't noticed before. Tall, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire room, his dark eyes were warm yet calculating. He was dressed in a sleek suit, his appearance impeccable, as if he owned the world. He was the type of man who was used to being in control, used to having people gravitate toward him. But there was something about him that caught Sarah off guard, something intriguing, magnetic. "I don't need any company," Sarah muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't in the mood for anyone's sympathy. Her heart was broken, and she didn't want to face anyone, least of all a stranger. But Cole didn't back off. Instead, he slid onto the stool next to her, his demeanor calm and unbothered. "I wasn't offering company," he said with a half-smile, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "But something tells me you could use a distraction." Sarah didn't know why, but there was something about the way he spoke, his voice low, steady, that made her feel like she could tell him anything. The ache in her chest was still there, raw and bleeding, but for a brief moment, she considered talking to this stranger. After all, what did she have to lose? Her voice cracked as she replied, "I just found out something I wish I hadn't." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Whatever it is, it can't be as bad as you think." He didn't press her further, just ordered a drink and let the silence settle between them. And in that silence, Sarah felt something stir, something other than the pain of betrayal. It was a subtle pull, a flicker of curiosity about this man sitting next to her. But she wasn't ready to let go of the hurt yet. She wasn't ready to let anyone in. Still, she found herself looking at him, wondering how it was that, even in her heartbreak, she could feel so drawn to him. And in that moment, Sarah realized something she hadn't expected. Her life, the one she thought she knew so well, was about to change. Not because of Logan's betrayal, but because of the mysterious man who had just entered her life, as if fate had a hand in it all. But what would happen next? Would she stay trapped in the pain of the past, or would she allow herself to step into something entirely unknown? The bar was dimly lit, filled with murmurs of conversation and the clinking of glasses. It felt like the kind of place where people came to drown their sorrows, to forget the weight of the world for a few hours. Sarah, still reeling from the devastating scene she had witnessed in room 211, sat at the bar, her drink untouched in front of her. She stared into the glass, lost in her thoughts, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of her heart. The last thing she wanted was attention, but she felt it, like an electric pulse through the air. She wasn't the kind of woman who normally attracted the gaze of men like him. But tonight, things were different. Cole Whitmore entered the bar with the quiet power of someone who had mastered the art of making an entrance without saying a word. At 32, he was everything Sarah wasn't. While she wore her emotions on her sleeve, he wore an air of control that was almost suffocating in its precision. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as though he had just walked away from something important, and his tailored suit fit him like it had been custom-made. Every movement he made was deliberate, calculated. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he knew how to get it. His eyes swept the room as he approached the bar, searching, as if looking for something or someone. And when they landed on her, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. It was like he could see right through her, as if he could sense the vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide. Her heart, still broken, hammered in her chest, but it wasn't the kind of fear that paralyzed her. It was the kind of fear that made her feel alive, a spark of interest igniting deep within her. He didn't hesitate. With a smoothness that felt like it was practiced over years, Cole slid onto the stool next to her. His presence was magnetic, filling the space around them in a way that made her forget to breathe. "You look like you could use another drink," he said, his voice low and velvety. He wasn't asking, but he wasn't demanding either. It was a statement, one that made her feel as though she didn't have a choice. "I'm not sure I'm in the mood," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper, her gaze still fixed on her drink. She wasn't trying to ignore him, but she wasn't ready to engage. Not yet. "I can't imagine the mood you're in," Cole said, "but maybe a drink will help, or at least take the edge off." Sarah finally turned her head, meeting his eyes. He wasn't looking at her with pity or sympathy. He wasn't trying to fix her, wasn't offering words of comfort. He simply watched her, his gaze intense but calm, as if he was waiting for her to decide what would happen next. And for a moment, Sarah thought of Logan. The betrayal still burned in her chest, an open wound that she hadn't yet found the strength to tend to. Maybe she didn't want to think about it right now. Maybe, for a moment, she wanted to be distracted. "All right," she said, her voice steady, though her heart wasn't. "One drink." The bartender, who had been watching the exchange with a raised eyebrow, quickly mixed a cocktail and placed it in front of Sarah. She took a small sip, feeling the burn slide down her throat, hoping it would numb the hurt if only for a little while. The drink was sharp, but it did nothing to erase the emptiness gnawing at her. Cole didn't immediately say anything. He just watched her, his eyes never leaving her face. Sarah could feel the weight of his gaze like a physical presence. She wasn't used to this, being observed with such intensity. Most men glanced at her and moved on, but Cole was different. There was a predatory calm about him, as if he was carefully studying every move she made, every breath she took. "Are you always this quiet?" she asked, her voice tinged with a touch of sarcasm. She didn't expect him to answer, but she needed something, anything, to fill the silence between them. "I only speak when I have something worth saying," he replied, his lips curling into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. His words felt like a challenge, as if daring her to speak, to ask more. She stared at him for a moment, weighing her options. She could turn away, she could end the conversation, but there was something about him, something that felt dangerous yet intriguing. He wasn't like Logan, who had been so easy to love. Cole Whitmore was a puzzle, one that Sarah wasn't sure she wanted to solve but couldn't seem to resist trying anyway. "So what do you want, Cole?" she asked, her voice steady now, though she could still feel the tension building between them, thick and electric. "Why are you here?" His smile never wavered, but there was something in his eyes, something almost unreadable. "Maybe I'm here because I saw you," he said. "And maybe, just maybe, I'm here because I know you're not the woman you want to be right now." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know whether it was the drink or his words, but something inside her shifted. It was as if he had reached into the depths of her soul and pulled something out, something that she wasn't ready to face, but couldn't deny. "Is that so?" Sarah said, almost amused. "And what am I supposed to be?" "Someone who doesn't let a man like Logan define her," he replied, his voice cool, but with an edge that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. "You're better than him." The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She had spent the last few hours trying to convince herself that Logan's betrayal didn't matter, that she would move on. But Cole's words made her stop and think. What was she doing here, sitting with a man who knew nothing about her past? Was she really ready to let go of the pain? "Maybe you're right," Sarah said quietly, feeling a rush of emotions she couldn't quite sort through. "Maybe I am better than him." The silence between them grew heavy, but this time it was different. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was charged, like the calm before a storm. There was an unspoken understanding between them, something raw and unfiltered. Sarah could feel it in her bones. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she admitted, her voice soft but resolute. Cole didn't respond immediately. He just looked at her, his eyes thoughtful, studying her every word. Finally, after a beat that seemed to last forever, he nodded. "Then don't be," he said, his voice smooth, offering a subtle invitation. The words were simple, but the weight they carried was undeniable. Sarah felt a flutter in her chest, something she couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the unexpected connection she felt with this man. But she knew this wasn't going to be just another distraction. This was the beginning of something else. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and Sarah stood there, her palms sweating, her mind swirling in a haze of uncertainty. She had no idea what she was doing, no idea where this night was leading. Cole had invited her to his apartment, just a short drive from the hotel. Part of her wanted to refuse, to go back to the safety of her apartment, to crawl into bed and forget the world outside. But the other part of her, the part that felt alive with curiosity and a strange sense of attraction, couldn't resist. She hadn't expected to be in this situation when she'd left her apartment earlier that evening. But now, here she was, in the back of a sleek black car heading toward the unknown. The tension between them was palpable, like an electric current that passed silently between their bodies. Cole's presence was overwhelming in the confined space of the car, and Sarah could feel his eyes on her even though he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. He was waiting, observing, like a predator calculating its next move. And despite the unease that curled in her stomach, Sarah couldn't bring herself to pull away. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew her in, no matter how hard she tried to fight it. When the car finally pulled up in front of the building, Cole's penthouse stood towering above the city, a gleaming beacon of wealth and power. The lights inside shone brightly through the large windows, casting long shadows across the street below. Sarah felt small in comparison, as if she were about to enter a world far removed from her own. But Cole didn't give her time to think. He led her inside, and as soon as they entered the lobby, the air seemed to change. It was cooler, more refined, and Sarah could smell the faint scent of leather and polished wood. It was the scent of wealth, of a life she had never imagined for herself. As they stepped into the elevator, the silence between them grew heavier, suffocating almost. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest, each beat resonating in her ears. She couldn't understand what was happening to her. She had no intention of getting involved with a man like Cole Whitmore. He was powerful, commanding, and she was still raw from the heartbreak she had experienced just hours ago. But there was something about him, something that pulled her in, despite her better judgment. The elevator doors slid open, and Cole gestured for her to step out first. Sarah hesitated for a moment, looking around at the sleek marble floors and the high-end art adorning the walls. Everything about this place screamed perfection, yet it felt cold, almost sterile, like a carefully curated museum rather than a home. "This is my place," Cole said, his voice low and measured as he led her through the entryway. "Make yourself at home." She followed him through the spacious living room, her eyes scanning the modern furniture, the towering windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city lights below. The apartment was beautiful, of course, but it was more than that. It was a reflection of him, a place that exuded control, power, and distance. It felt like he was trying to keep something hidden, something just out of reach, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder what it was. "You can stay here for the night," he continued, motioning toward a guest room on the far side of the apartment. "If you need anything, just ask." Sarah nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. There was no denying that she felt a connection to Cole, one that she hadn't expected. But it was more than that. There was something in the way he carried himself, the way he spoke to her with such casual authority, that made her feel both comforted and intimidated at the same time. He wasn't like Logan. He wasn't the kind of man who would promise her love, only to betray her. But then again, maybe that was the problem. Cole wasn't offering her anything at all. There were no promises, no commitments. He was offering her only a taste of what he could give, and in that moment, Sarah wasn't sure if she was ready to walk away. "Do you want to stay in the guest room?" Cole's voice brought her back to the present. His question was simple, but it carried a weight that Sarah couldn't ignore. She glanced up at him, and for the first time, she noticed the softness in his eyes. Beneath the cold exterior, beneath the power and control, there was something more, something that felt almost human. But she wasn't sure if she could trust it. "I'm not sure," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know what she was afraid of. Maybe it was the fear of letting go of the past, or maybe it was the fear of what Cole might represent. She had always been independent, always careful with her heart. But in that moment, surrounded by the luxury of his penthouse and the magnetic pull of his presence, Sarah felt vulnerable. And that was something she wasn't used to. "I'm not asking for anything," Cole said, his voice steady but with an undertone of something more. "I just want you to be comfortable. If you want to stay in the guest room, it's yours. But if you'd rather stay with me, the bed's big enough for two." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There was no force in his words, no pressure, but she could feel the weight of his invitation, the subtle challenge in his tone. It was up to her to decide. "I don't know what I want," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm here, aren't I?" Cole gave a small smile, and Sarah couldn't tell if it was one of amusement or something deeper. "You are," he said, his eyes locking onto hers, "and that's enough." With that, Sarah found herself following him to the large king-sized bed at the center of the room. The tension between them was palpable now, but it wasn't the kind of tension that came from anger or frustration. It was the kind of tension that came from desire, from something unspoken and irresistible. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands nervously twisting in her lap. The silence between them stretched, thick with anticipation. And for the first time, Sarah wasn't sure whether she wanted to resist or give in. Cole stood by the window, looking out over the city, his back to her. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," he said, his voice quiet, almost contemplative. "I'm not here to push you, but if you want to stay, if you want to talk, I'm here." It was an offer of something different, not promises, not expectations, just the presence of someone who understood how to let things unfold naturally. And in that moment, Sarah realized she didn't know if she could walk away. Not yet. Not with him standing there, offering her a chance at something new, something that was no longer tied to the past. "I don't know why I'm here," she said, her voice trembling. "But I don't want to leave." Cole turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a gaze that was both tender and intense. "Then stay," he said softly, his voice wrapped in something almost like a promise. "And let the night unfold as it will." The soft light of morning filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Cole's penthouse, casting a warm glow across the sleek, modern kitchen. Sarah, still wrapped in the shirt she had borrowed the night before, sat at the kitchen counter, her legs crossed beneath her. The quiet of the apartment was a far cry from the storm that had raged in her heart the night before. She hadn't slept much, and when she closed her eyes, the events of the previous evening replayed in her mind, too vivid to forget. But now, as she sat there, something else filled the air: anticipation. She could hear the soft clatter of dishes coming from the kitchen as Cole moved around preparing breakfast. It was such a small thing, such a simple act, but it felt different coming from him. The man who exuded power, control, and an almost unshakable confidence was doing something as intimate as making breakfast. And there was something in the way he moved that made Sarah feel both comfortable and uneasy at the same time. She had always been a woman who valued independence, someone who prided herself on doing things on her own terms. But sitting here, in this sleek, sterile environment, she couldn't help but feel the weight of Cole's presence. He was a man who commanded attention without saying a word, and somehow he had managed to slip past the walls she had carefully built around herself. As she watched him move around the kitchen, Cole's back turned to her. She found herself noticing things she hadn't before. The way his muscles flexed beneath his shirt as he reached for something on the top shelf. The quiet confidence with which he navigated his space, as if everything in his life was ordered, planned, controlled. It was impressive, but it was also unsettling. "Would you like eggs or something lighter?" Cole's voice broke through her thoughts, smooth and deep, but also tinged with something else, a hint of tenderness perhaps. "Eggs sound fine," she replied, her voice a little softer than she intended. It was almost as if the intimacy of the moment, so simple and yet so profound, had an effect on her. He turned to face her, a small smile on his lips. There was something in his expression, something that Sarah couldn't quite place, but it made her feel exposed. He was watching her, studying her reactions as if he were trying to decipher a puzzle. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but instead of looking away, she met his gaze, challenging him without speaking. Cole began to prepare the eggs, his movements precise, controlled. He cracked the eggs into a pan with an ease that spoke of years of practice, the sizzling sound filling the air as the kitchen began to smell of butter and fresh herbs. Sarah's stomach growled softly, and she realized how hungry she was, how much she had been neglecting her own needs lately. The thought made her feel vulnerable. How could she let herself be so caught up in something so unexpected? "You don't have to do this," she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "How you don't need to impress me." Cole paused for a moment, his hand hovering over the stove. He turned slightly to face her, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I'm not trying to impress you, Sarah," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to show you that I care." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. He wasn't offering her grand gestures or promises of love. He wasn't trying to win her over with charm. He was simply doing something kind, something that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. But there was something about that care that made her uncomfortable. It was too much, too soon, and yet it felt like a part of the puzzle she couldn't solve. She had expected to feel nothing here, expected to leave behind the pain of her past and be distracted by Cole's presence. But now, as she watched him move around the kitchen, offering her a cup of coffee with a careful, almost reverential touch, she felt something stir inside her, something she didn't know how to name. "You've been through a lot," Cole said, breaking the silence as he set a plate of eggs in front of her. "I can see it. I don't want to add to that burden, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what." Sarah didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to tell him that she wasn't some fragile thing that needed his care, that she didn't need anyone to save her. But another part of her, the part that was tired of pretending, simply nodded. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I appreciate it." They ate in silence for a few moments, the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. Cole was watching her carefully, his eyes never leaving her face. And as Sarah glanced up at him, she realized just how much he was paying attention to every small reaction she had, every subtle shift in her posture, every glance, every hesitation. It was as though he was studying her, observing her like a scientist with an experiment. When breakfast was finished, Cole stood and moved to the living room, but not before returning to the kitchen counter, where he picked up something small and delicate from the edge. Sarah didn't notice it at first, but when he returned, he held it out to her. "It's a gift," he said, his voice almost tender. "I thought you might like it." Sarah looked down at the small bracelet in his hand. It was a delicate silver chain, with a small charm that glimmered in the light. It was beautiful, understated but elegant. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. She reached out to take it, but as her fingers brushed against the cool metal, something in her paused. It wasn't the bracelet itself, it was the weight of the gesture. "There's something you should know," Cole added quietly, his tone shifting. "This bracelet has more purpose than just a gift. It's also a tracker." The words hit her like a slap in the face. Her heart skipped a beat and she pulled her hand back, her pulse quickening. "A tracker," Sarah repeated, her voice a little sharper now. "What do you mean?" Cole's eyes locked with hers, a flicker of something darker passing through them. "It's a way for me to make sure you're safe, for me to know where you are, to keep track of you." Sarah's stomach twisted. The warm, affectionate gesture suddenly felt like a trap, like something much darker than a simple act of care. Her instincts flared, the warning bells ringing loudly in her head. She pulled her hand back, standing up from the table and putting space between them. "Cole," she said, her voice low but firm. "I don't need you to track me. I don't need you to keep tabs on where I go or what I do. I'm not some object for you to control." Cole didn't immediately respond. He simply stood there, his expression unreadable. The tension in the room was thick, and Sarah could feel the space between them shifting, the air heavy with unspoken understanding. "I never meant to make you feel controlled," he said, his voice calm but with an underlying edge. "But I can't help it if I care, if I want to keep you safe." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Sarah wasn't sure what to say. There was so much she didn't understand about Cole, about his intentions, about the kind of man he really was. And in that moment, she realized that no matter how magnetic, how charming, how caring he seemed, there was something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. But the question remained, could she trust him? And what would it cost her to do so? The silence between them was thick, heavier than any words could ever be. Outside, the city sky blinked with the glow of distant lights, but inside the penthouse, time seemed to slow. The muffled sound of jazz filled the room, but all Sarah could hear was the rapid beat of her own heart, echoing in her ears like the rhythm of something unfamiliar, something new. She was sitting on the couch, her legs crossed, still wearing the white shirt of his, its sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The fabric was soft against her skin, and she could smell a faint trace of his cologne. Her hair was still damp from the shower she had taken earlier, the water still fresh on her skin. She felt strangely exposed, and yet there was a comfort in the way she sat there, as though the moment had already been written in some distant chapter of her life. Cole moved across the room slowly, deliberately, not rushing, as if savoring the anticipation of every step. There was no urgency in his movements, no intent to dominate the moment. He stopped in front of her, his presence overwhelming, and crouched down to meet her eyes. His gaze was intense, unwavering, but there was something in it, something softer that she hadn't noticed before. He was waiting for something, for a sign, a signal from her. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice low, barely more than a whisper. Sarah looked at him, feeling her heart flutter, not from fear, but from something else. She shook her head slowly. "Not afraid. I just don't know how it's supposed to be." He seemed to consider this for a moment, before reaching out to gently touch her face, his fingers trailing along the curve of her cheek down to her jawline. His touch was light, almost reverent, as if she were something fragile, something precious he didn't want to break. "It should be exactly like this," Cole said, his voice low and soothing. "With patience, with truth, and with you in control of every choice." The words sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. It wasn't just his voice, it was the sincerity behind them, the understanding that seemed to radiate from him. He wasn't trying to rush her, to force anything. He was simply offering her the space to decide, to choose. And in that moment, Sarah realized she had never been given that kind of freedom before, not like this, not by someone who truly saw her. For a moment, she simply stared at him, her chest tight, as emotions she hadn't expected to feel surged inside her. She had never felt so seen, so understood, and yet so completely unguarded. Something inside her shifted, and before she could second-guess herself, she reached out and intertwined her fingers with his. "Stay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But slowly, Cole's eyes softened, and he nodded as though she had just entrusted him with a secret, something sacred. There was no rush now, no sense of urgency. Instead, there was a quiet understanding between them, a connection that neither of them had expected, but couldn't deny. He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers with a tenderness that took Sarah's breath away. It wasn't a kiss filled with desperation or hunger, but with patience, an invitation, a promise. It was a kiss that deepened slowly, like a river winding its way through a valley, each moment stretching into the next with unspoken intentions. As his lips moved from her mouth to her neck, she shuddered, her body reacting to his touch like it was the first time it had ever truly felt. His lips skimmed over the soft skin of her neck, down to her shoulder, each kiss sending ripples of warmth across her skin. His touch was careful, gentle, yet there was an intensity in it, an energy that she could feel pulsing between them. He carefully lowered her onto the immaculate white sheets, the softness of the bedding contrasting with the heat that radiated from their bodies. Cole's hands were everywhere, but not in a way that felt overpowering. He was asking permission with every movement, checking her expressions, watching her eyes, making sure she was comfortable, making sure she was ready. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she felt the warmth of his body against hers, her skin tingling where their bodies met. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but suddenly, all the walls she had spent years building, around her heart, around her emotions, had come crumbling down. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't unsure. She was here with him, in this moment, and it felt right. She reached up, her fingers gently brushing through his hair as she pulled him closer, feeling the weight of him on top of her, his body pressing against hers in a way that left no space between them. Their bodies molded together as if they had always been meant to fit in this way. There was no rush, no urgency, just a slow, deliberate exploration. "Beautiful," Cole murmured against her skin, his voice rough with emotion. "I never want to forget this moment." The words wrapped around Sarah like a delicate thread, binding her to him in a way she couldn't explain. There was no fear now, no doubt, only warmth, only closeness. They moved together, their bodies and souls in sync, each touch an exploration, each kiss a discovery. The sheets became witnesses to a surrender that was not just physical, but emotional. It was an intimacy that went beyond the surface, beyond the physical. It was a sharing of something deeper, something that had been waiting to be uncovered. Cole's touch was like an artist's hand, gentle but purposeful, as he studied every inch of her, as if trying to memorize her. Sarah didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to control it. She simply allowed herself to be, to feel, to experience the moment, without fear, without doubt. She cried softly, her tears a release, a cleansing, as if the pain of the past had finally been washed away, replaced by something pure, something that she could only define as love. They stayed like that, for what felt like an eternity, in a quiet afterglow. Sarah's head rested on Cole's chest, and his fingers traced gentle circles on her back, each movement slow, deliberate, as if memorizing the feel of her skin. There were no words, only the soft sound of their breathing, the quiet thrum of their hearts beating in unison. And in that silence, Sarah realized something she hadn't expected to understand. She wasn't here out of obligation. She wasn't here because of need or loneliness. She was here because, with every fiber of her being, she felt loved, not in a possessive or controlling way, but in the purest sense. She felt seen, cherished, and held in a way that she had never experienced before. It wasn't just the touch, the passion, or the intimacy. It was the fact that she had found someone who didn't demand, who didn't rush, who didn't push. He simply allowed her to be, to exist. And for the first time, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The days that followed Sarah's night with Cole were filled with an undeniable tension. The electric connection between them was still palpable, but it wasn't just the sweetness of their intimacy that lingered in the air. Something else was brewing beneath the surface, something darker, more possessive. Sarah had tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the quiet moments they shared. But as the days went on, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, controlled in a way that unsettled her. It started small. At first, it was just little things. Cole's careful attention to her schedule, the way he always knew where she was. He would text her, asking where she was or what she was doing, and though the messages were polite, almost loving, there was an undercurrent of something else, something that felt like a demand rather than a simple question. One evening, after a late study session, Sarah stood in the kitchen of his penthouse, sipping a glass of water as she tried to relax. Cole was in the living room, talking on the phone with someone, his voice low but urgent. She didn't catch all the words, but the tone was unmistakable. There was an intensity to the conversation, and though he wasn't speaking directly to her, she felt the weight of it. When he hung up, he turned to her, his gaze sharp and focused. "Where were you today?" Sarah frowned, trying to mask the confusion and irritation she felt. She had been at the library for hours, preparing for an upcoming exam, and she'd mentioned it to him earlier. Why was he asking again? "I was studying," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "At the library, like I said." Cole's expression softened slightly, but there was something about his gaze that made her uneasy. "I'd just like to know where you are, Sarah. You've been spending a lot of time out of the house lately." "I'm busy with school," she said, her tone a little sharper than she intended. "I can't stay here all the time." Cole didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked toward her slowly, his presence overwhelming. "I understand," he said quietly, "but you need to understand something else. I don't like it when you're out of my sight. You don't know what kind of people are out there." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at his words. "I'm not a child, Cole," she said, the words coming out more forcefully than she meant. "I can take care of myself." He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "I'm just trying to protect you," he said, his voice almost tender. But Sarah could hear the subtle possessiveness in his words, the way he framed his actions as something noble, when in reality it felt more like control. That night, she lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her chest, the growing realization that Cole's protection felt more like a cage. She had never been the kind of woman who needed anyone to guard her every move. She had built her life, her independence, with hard work and determination. And yet, here she was, feeling suffocated by someone who claimed to care for her, but whose actions spoke of something entirely different. A few days later, the tension between them came to a head when Sarah received an email from Dr. Carter Mason, a respected professor at her university. He had offered her a research position for an upcoming project, one that would be a huge opportunity for her career. It was everything she had worked toward, a chance to prove herself in the academic world. She was excited, nervous, but above all, she was proud. She immediately called Dr. Mason to confirm the details, and as soon as she hung up, she felt her phone vibrate. A message from Cole. "I saw the email. I don't like it." Sarah's stomach dropped. She hadn't even told him yet. She hadn't had the chance to explain that this was important to her, that it wasn't just a job. It was a stepping stone to something bigger. But now, his response left her feeling like she had already been judged. "Cole," she texted back, trying to remain calm. "It's just a research opportunity. You don't even know the details." The reply came almost instantly. "It's another man, and you're working with him. I don't like it." Her heart began to race, anger bubbling up inside her. "Cole, this is my career. You can't control every aspect of my life. Dr. Mason is a respected professor. He's not some..." "Don't be naive," his message cut in. "You don't need to work with him. I can set you up with better opportunities. I don't want you getting involved with someone like that. The words stung, each one like a slap to her face. He was telling her what she could and couldn't do, all under the guise of protection. It wasn't about her future or her ambitions. It was about him trying to keep her close, to keep her in his world, and he didn't care what it cost her. She stared at her phone, her hands shaking slightly as the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about care. This was control. He wanted to isolate her, to pull her away from the world, to make sure she had no choice but to rely on him. "No, Cole," she replied, her fingers trembling as she typed. "I'm doing this. I need to do this for myself." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, and the silence that followed felt like the calm before a storm. She knew Cole wouldn't take this well, but she also knew that if she didn't stand her ground now, she would lose herself in his world. Minutes passed and Cole didn't respond. The tension between them was unbearable, the air thick with unspoken words. Sarah didn't know what to do next. Part of her wanted to leave, to pack her things and walk out of this penthouse for good. But another part of her, the part that still felt something for Cole, wanted to understand him, to find out what had made him this way. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that his behavior wasn't something she could ignore. She couldn't let him control her. Not now. Not ever. Later that night, they met for dinner, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of their unspoken conflict. Cole was quieter than usual, his eyes fixed on his plate. Sarah, though, couldn't stop thinking about the research opportunity. She couldn't stop thinking about how she had stood up for herself, how she had fought for her independence. It felt like the first time in a long time that she had taken control of her own life. As they sat in silence, Sarah knew something had changed. It wasn't just the tension between them. It was the realization that Cole wasn't who she had thought he was. He wasn't the man who would let her fly. He was the man who would try to keep her grounded. And she wasn't sure how much longer she could stay in a relationship built on such fragile foundations. The question now was clear. Would she continue to let Cole define her, or would she fight for herself? And if she fought, what would happen to them? Sarah sat in the passenger seat, staring out of the window, the lights of the city passing in a blur. The air inside the car was thick with silence, each moment stretching longer than the last. Her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her purse, her mind racing, but all she could hear was the sound of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Cole's presence beside her was suffocating, his aura filling the small space with a weight she no longer wanted to bear. For days, the tension had been building, thickening like a storm cloud ready to burst. Cole's possessiveness had started as something subtle, small comments, gentle nudges, but it had escalated, turning into something larger, something more dangerous. The more she resisted, the more he pulled her in, the more he tried to control her every move. It wasn't just his insistence on knowing where she was or who she was with. It was the constant weight of his expectations, the way he tried to make her feel as though she owed him, as though her independence was a threat to what they had. It wasn't love, it was control, and Sarah couldn't stand it any longer. "Cole," she began, her voice quieter than she meant it to be, but firm. "We need to talk." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable, his knuckles gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. "What's going on, Sarah?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it, a warning. "What's with the sudden change?" Sarah took a deep breath, gathering the courage to say what she'd been avoiding. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice steady now, the words flowing out of her like a dam breaking free. "I can't keep living under your watch, under your control. I need space." Cole's jaw tightened, his gaze never leaving the road ahead. He didn't speak at first, the tension thickening between them. He was the kind of man who was used to being in control, used to getting what he wanted when he wanted it. But for once, Sarah wasn't going to let him have it. "You think you need space?" he finally asked, his voice cold but with an edge of desperation. "You think you need to walk away from this? From me?" "Yes," she replied, the word almost a relief to say aloud. "I do. I need to find myself again. I need to breathe, to be on my own." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could feel the heat of Cole's anger, even though he didn't raise his voice. She could feel the battle within him, the frustration, the helplessness, as he tried to keep her in the car, in his world, in his grasp. But she couldn't stay any longer. Not like this, not under the weight of his expectations, his silent demands. "Pull over," she said quietly, the words almost a command. Cole's eyes flickered toward her, disbelief flashing across his face. "What are you talking about? We're almost there." "I'm serious," Sarah replied, her tone unyielding. "Pull over. I need to get out." He didn't argue. Slowly, as if he was unsure whether to comply or protest, Cole pulled the car over to the side of the road. The engine hummed quietly, and for a moment they both sat in the stillness, the air thick with the weight of their unspoken words. Sarah opened the door, her heart racing in her chest. She could feel the sharp sting of the night air against her skin as she stepped out of the car, her legs shaky but determined. She wasn't sure where she was going, only that she needed to be away from him, away from the suffocating tension he had created. "Sarah, wait!" Cole's voice called out behind her, but she didn't stop. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She walked away from the car, her footsteps quickening as she put distance between them. Her mind was in turmoil, her heart beating in her chest like a wild drum, but it was the first time in weeks that she felt like she could breathe. The control he had over her was slipping away, and with it the fear and the pressure that had been slowly suffocating her. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was doing something for herself, something that was hers and hers alone. Later that night, Sarah walked across the campus, her thoughts a whirlwind. She didn't know where she was going or what she would do, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. For the first time, she had made a decision for herself, and though it had been difficult, it had been necessary. As she passed by the Student Union building, something caught her eye. A sleek black car was parked on the curb just a few spaces down. The engine was still running, and through the window, she saw a familiar figure sitting inside. It was Cole. He was sitting there, staring straight ahead, but Sarah could see the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel. He hadn't followed her, not immediately, but he was still here, watching her, waiting. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at him from across the campus. His presence was unmistakable, even from a distance. He was like a shadow she couldn't shake, a constant reminder of the power he held over her. But as much as it hurt, as much as her heart ached to see him sitting there, Sarah knew this was the moment she had to face. She had walked away. She had made a choice. And now, she had to stick with it. She turned away, her steps steady as she continued walking, forcing herself to ignore the pull of his gaze. She couldn't let him have control over her anymore. She couldn't let him watch her every move, control every decision she made. Sarah didn't know what would happen next, or how things would end between them, but she knew this. She was free. For the first time in a long time, she was free. And that was all that mattered. The weekend arrived, and Sarah's nerves were on edge as she and her best friend Chloe made their way to the farewell party at the university. The campus was buzzing with excitement, filled with students celebrating the end of their time together. But for Sarah, it wasn't just about saying goodbye to the college experience. It was about stepping into something new, something she hadn't fully embraced before. The music was loud, the atmosphere charged with the energy of young people on the brink of change. Sarah felt an unfamiliar sense of anticipation, mixed with a twinge of anxiety. The last time she'd been to a party like this, it had been with Logan, and she had never expected to walk through those doors again, not with him, not after everything that had happened. But things were different now. She was different. Chloe, ever the supportive friend, could sense Sarah's unease and nudged her playfully. "You're going to be fine," Chloe assured her. "Tonight is about you. Just let go and enjoy yourself for once." Sarah smiled at her, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. The truth was, she didn't know what to expect. She had spent so much of the past few weeks in a haze of emotions, caught between the pull of Cole's suffocating presence and the fight for her independence. But this night, this was her night. They walked into the party, and immediately, the warm, bustling atmosphere overwhelmed Sarah. She scanned the room, feeling the familiar pulse of music and conversation. But there was one face that immediately caught her eye. Logan. He was standing across the room talking to a group of friends, but as soon as Sarah entered, his eyes landed on her. The smirk that appeared on his face sent a chill down her spine, but it wasn't fear that made her heart race. It was the realization that she wasn't afraid of him anymore. She hadn't seen him in weeks, not since the betrayal, not since that awful night in the hotel. She had been avoiding him, hiding from the pain he had caused her. But now here he was, watching her with those same mocking eyes. She didn't know what to do at first. Part of her wanted to turn and leave the room to avoid the confrontation, to avoid him entirely. But then she thought of Cole, how his presence had made her feel strong, empowered, even when she wasn't sure of everything he represented. She had learned so much in the last few days, and one of the biggest lessons was this: no one had the right to make her feel small. Not Logan, and certainly not Cole. Before she could think too much about it, Chloe, who had been chatting with a few people nearby, nudged her in the direction of the bar. As Sarah walked toward it, she felt Logan's gaze following her, like a weight on her shoulders. But this time she didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. As she reached the bar, Logan made his move. He walked up to her with that same arrogant swagger, as though nothing had changed between them. "Well, well, look who finally showed up," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the surge of power that ran through her veins. She had spent so much time letting Logan define who she was, letting his actions decide how she saw herself. But now she was done with that. She wasn't going to let him have that kind of power over her anymore. "Logan," she said, her voice calm but laced with something sharp, something he wasn't used to hearing from her. "I didn't think I'd see you here, but I guess it makes sense. You've always enjoyed being the center of attention." He chuckled, stepping closer. "You know, you could have just moved on, but I see you're still hanging on to the past. Pathetic." The words stung, but Sarah didn't flinch. She wasn't going to let him take her back to the place of hurt and humiliation. Instead, she met his gaze head-on, her voice steady and clear. "I'm not pathetic, Logan," she said, taking a sip from her drink. "And I'm not hanging on to the past, but you clearly are." She looked him up and down, her expression unreadable. "It must be exhausting, still trying to be the same person you were back then. You know, the one who thought he could treat people like toys." For a moment, there was silence between them. Logan's smirk faltered, replaced with something Sarah couldn't quite place. Surprise, maybe, or uncertainty. But it didn't matter. The power had shifted. She wasn't the broken girl anymore. She was someone else now, someone who had found her voice. Before Logan could respond, Sarah did something that surprised even her. She reached for her drink, her cocktail, and tossed it across his chest in one swift movement. The liquid splashed over his shirt, leaving a trail of bright red stains in its wake. Logan stood frozen, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. The room fell silent for a moment, as if the entire party had collectively held its breath. And then Sarah spoke, her voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. "You're nothing to me anymore, Logan," she said, her words clear, firm, and final. "I'm happy now. I'm happy for having met Cole, even if he's complicated. He at least knows what it means to let me breathe. Unlike you." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, Logan didn't move. He looked at her, the reality of her statement sinking in. Sarah wasn't going to let him humiliate her. She wasn't going to play his games anymore. She turned away from him then, feeling an unexpected sense of liberation flood through her. For the first time in a long time, she felt in control of her own narrative. The room slowly resumed its normal rhythm, the buzz of conversation picking up again, but Sarah couldn't shake the weight that had lifted off her shoulders. She had taken back her power. As she walked away, Chloe appeared beside her, her eyes wide with admiration. "Sarah," she said, her voice filled with awe. "That was amazing. You took him down a notch, didn't you?" Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I had to, for me." It wasn't just about Logan, though. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about reclaiming her sense of self, her confidence, and the freedom to choose who she was, without anyone else's approval. And in that moment, Sarah realized something. She wasn't just free from Logan's hold, she was free from all the chains that had bound her for so long. No longer would she let someone else dictate her worth, She had her voice back, she had her life back, and this time, she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. It was well past midnight when Sarah stood in front of Cole's penthouse door, her heart racing, her mind clear. The cool air of the night brushed against her skin, but it was the weight of her own resolve that made her feel alive. She had spent too long allowing the tides of emotion to pull her in different directions, too long letting Cole's dominance dictate the flow of things between them. But tonight, everything would change. Tonight, she would take control. She had no words, no grand declarations to make, no need for explanations. The time for talking was over. What mattered now was action. Her finger hovered over the doorbell for a moment, and then she pressed it, the sound echoing through the quiet hallway. As the seconds ticked by, Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but there was no hesitation in her. This was her choice, her power. When the door finally opened, Cole stood there, his usual composed self, dressed in a dark robe, his expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity, his eyes locked with hers, searching for the words, the reason behind this late-night visit. But Sarah didn't give him the chance to speak. She didn't need to explain herself. She had already made up her mind. Without saying a word, Sarah stepped inside. She didn't wait for an invitation. She didn't need one. As she crossed the threshold, she could feel the shift in the air between them. The familiar tension was still there, but now it was different. It wasn't the kind of tension that made her shrink away. It was the kind that made her stand taller, breathe deeper. She was in charge, and for the first time in their complicated dynamic, it felt right. Cole closed the door behind her, but she didn't give him a chance to step closer. She moved toward him with purpose, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor as she approached him. He didn't stop her. He simply watched, his eyes dark and intense, waiting to see what she would do next. "Sarah," he began, his voice low, almost cautious. But Sarah cut him off. She reached up, placing a finger against his lips to silence him. Her touch was confident, unshakable, and it felt like the world had shifted into alignment. She had always known how to read him, how to sense his every move, but tonight, she was no longer a passive participant in their game. Tonight, she was the one making the moves. She didn't wait for his approval. She took the lead, her lips capturing his in a kiss that was slow at first, deliberate, as if both of them were testing the waters of this new dynamic. It was different from the kisses they had shared before. This time, it wasn't just about desire. It was about something deeper, something that reached beyond their physical connection. It was about power, trust, and surrender. Cole, who had always been the one in control, was now responding to her, allowing her to guide the kiss, to control the pace. The softness of his lips against hers was like a challenge, a silent question asking if she truly had the strength to hold the reins. And she did. Breaking the kiss, Sarah stepped back, her breath steady but her heart racing with a new kind of confidence. She wasn't scared. She wasn't unsure. This was her moment. She reached for his hand and placed it on her waist, guiding him toward the bedroom. She didn't need to speak. He followed her without protest, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. When they reached the bed, Sarah turned to face him. She could see the slight tremor in his hand, the uncertainty in his eyes. For all his control, all his power, there was something about her that made him let go. She didn't know if it was the way she was looking at him, or the certainty in her movements. But in that moment she knew she had him, completely. "Lay down," she said softly, her voice commanding but gentle. Cole didn't argue. He obeyed, sitting on the edge of the bed and leaning back. His eyes were still locked on hers, but there was a shift in his gaze now. Something almost vulnerable, something that had never been there before. Sarah reached for the drawer on the nightstand, pulling out a blindfold. Cole's eyes widened, his breath catching slightly as she moved toward him. She could see the wariness in his expression, the hesitation, but this was her choice. And this time, he would submit. Slowly, she placed the blindfold over his eyes, tying it gently behind his head. "Trust me," she whispered, her voice a breath against his ear. "This is how it's meant to be." Cole didn't say a word. He simply nodded, the tension in his body easing as he lay back, giving her the freedom to guide him. His body, so used to taking control, was now yielding to hers, and it felt right. She climbed onto the bed beside him, her body hovering over his as she lowered herself carefully. Her hands roamed over his chest, feeling the heat of his skin beneath her fingertips. Every inch of him was familiar, yet this moment felt entirely new. There was a vulnerability in him now, a vulnerability he had never shown before. And she reveled in it, taking the lead with a confidence she hadn't known she had. The night unfolded slowly, with Sarah in control every step of the way. There was no rush, no need to push or force anything. Each movement, each touch was deliberate, as if she were painting a masterpiece. She took her time, exploring him with the same reverence he had shown her when they first met. There was pleasure, yes, but there was also something deeper, something transformative. For the first time, she felt like she was the one holding the power, guiding him, showing him that surrendering to her was not weakness but a different kind of strength. The roles had shifted, and in that shift, something within both of them changed. Cole, the man who had always been in control, who had always been the one to lead, now lay beneath her, his body trembling not from fear, but from the surrender of control. Sarah moved with confidence, with sensuality, her every touch a promise that, for the first time, she was the one defining their connection. When the moment came to an end, Sarah lay next to him, her body pressed close to his, the air thick with the weight of what had just happened. There was no need for words. None were necessary. And in the silence that followed, Sarah understood something deep within her. This was not just a physical act. It was a transformation. She had claimed her place, not as a passive participant in Cole's world, but as an equal in their shared experience. The power had shifted, and this time it was hers. The soft light of dawn crept through the large windows of Cole's penthouse, casting a warm glow over the sleek, modern kitchen. Sarah had woken early, her body still humming with the quiet energy of the night before. She didn't want to linger in bed, didn't want to let the fleeting moments of their time together fade into the fog of uncertainty. No, today felt different. Today felt like a new beginning. She moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, her fingers deftly preparing breakfast as the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. There was a calmness in her movements, a centeredness that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just making breakfast, she was grounding herself, taking ownership of her life in a way she hadn't done in far too long. Her hair was still damp from the shower, and she had slipped into one of Cole's shirts, the fabric large on her frame. The sleeves rolled up at the elbows. The shirt smelled faintly of him, but today it wasn't an intrusion. It was a reminder of how far she had come. She didn't need to look over her shoulder to know that Cole was awake. She could feel his presence behind her, feel the weight of his gaze on her, but this time it didn't make her nervous. Instead, she felt a quiet confidence settle deep within her. She wasn't the same girl who had stumbled into his life weeks ago, broken and unsure. That girl was gone, left behind in the haze of betrayal and confusion. What stood before Cole now was someone who knew her worth, who understood that love didn't mean ownership, and that no matter how powerful or magnetic a man might be, she could stand on her own 2 feet. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and then Cole appeared in the doorway, his eyes immediately finding her. He stood still for a moment, taking in the sight of her, no longer the fragile, hesitant woman he had met that night, but someone else entirely. His gaze softened as he watched her move around the kitchen with a fluid grace, a quiet strength emanating from her. "You're up early," he said, his voice still thick with sleep, but there was something different in it, something softer, more respectful. Sarah didn't turn around at first. She continued preparing the breakfast, savoring the small, mundane moments that gave her comfort. But then, she placed the coffee pot down, turned, and met his gaze directly. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice steady. "But it's not just that I needed this time alone, this space to think." Cole stepped closer, his presence filling the room, but Sarah didn't feel the usual overwhelming weight of it. Instead, she felt a calmness, a quiet certainty that she hadn't felt before. She had changed, and it showed in every movement, in every word she spoke. She wasn't going to be his accessory anymore, his passive participant. She was his equal, no more, no less. As Cole reached out to touch her arm, Sarah gently pulled away, not out of anger, but out of a need for autonomy. "I'm not the same person you met, Cole," she said softly. "And I don't need you to fix me." Cole's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, but Sarah could see the shift in his demeanor. He was still the man who commanded attention, who dominated every room he entered. But something was different now. She wasn't intimidated by him anymore. She wasn't afraid to speak her truth. "Last night was different," Sarah continued, her voice calm but resolute. "It was intense, and it was beautiful, but I need to be clear about something. I'm not here to be possessed, Cole. I'm not some prize to be won. I'm here because I choose to be. I'm here because I want something real, but not from a place of ownership." Cole didn't speak at first. He looked at her, his gaze searching, as if trying to find something he hadn't expected in her. And for the first time, Sarah felt the weight of that scrutiny without flinching. She could feel his need for control, his fear of losing her, but she wasn't going to give in. Not now, not ever again. "I'm not asking for a master," she continued, her voice steady. "I'm asking for a partner, a man who sees me, who respects me, who values me as an equal. That's what I want, Cole. Not possession, not control. I want to be seen." There was a long pause, the air between them charged with the weight of her words. Sarah waited, but this time she wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid of what Cole would say or do. This was her truth, her choice, and she was standing in it. When Cole finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted, the vulnerability in his voice catching Sarah off guard. I've always been the one in control. It's how I've lived my life." "I know," Sarah said, her voice softening. "But I'm not asking you to change overnight. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. But I need you to understand something. I can't be with someone who sees me as something to own. I want someone who values me for who I am, not because I'm someone he can control." Cole's eyes softened as he took a step closer to her, his gaze now filled with something different, something more genuine, more thoughtful. "I never meant to make you feel like that," he said quietly. I thought I was doing what was best for you." Sarah smiled gently, a mixture of understanding and resolve in her expression. "I know you didn't mean to, but that doesn't change what I need. And if we're going to move forward, we need to do it on equal footing." They stood there for a long moment, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air between them. Sarah felt the shift in the room, felt the power of her own voice, her own choice, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was losing herself in someone else. She felt centered, grounded, and strong in her own skin. Cole reached out, his hand hovering for a moment as if asking for permission. Sarah met his gaze, her own eyes steady and unflinching. He wasn't just asking for forgiveness. He was asking for her to choose him, not out of need or control, but out of something real. "Will you stay?" he asked, his voice soft, vulnerable. "I'll stay," Sarah replied, her heart steady. "But only if we do it right. Only if we're equals." And for the first time, as she stood there with him, Sarah knew that the love they had, if it was to work, would need to be built on mutual respect. Not possession, not control, but a partnership where both of them were free to be who they truly were. The morning light poured into the penthouse through the large windows, bathing the room in a soft golden hue. Sarah had never felt more at peace, not just with Cole, but with herself. She had finally found her voice, her place in the world, and though things between them were still delicate, she could feel the beginnings of something real, something honest. They had spent the morning together, moving in a quiet rhythm, sharing small moments of connection that hadn't been there before. Cole was different now, no longer the man who tried to control her, but someone who respected her choices, her independence. Sarah had made her boundaries clear, and for the first time, she felt like they were both in the same space, emotionally, mentally, and physically. But today would be different. Today, Cole was about to show her something that even he had never revealed before. They sat together on the couch, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. Cole was unusually quiet, his hands resting nervously in his lap. Sarah noticed it immediately, the tension in his body, the way he couldn't quite meet her gaze. She wondered if something was on his mind, but she didn't press him. instead allowing the comfortable silence between them to settle. Then, without warning, Cole stood up. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he was unsure whether to proceed. Sarah's eyes followed him as he walked to the center of the room, her curiosity piqued. And then, in an unexpected, vulnerable moment, Cole dropped to one knee in front of her. For a second, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to pause around them as Cole looked up at her, his eyes filled with something raw, something that made her heart beat faster. His usually confident demeanor was replaced with a vulnerability that made her heart ache. "I've never been good at this," he began, his voice unsteady. "But I can't imagine my life without you in it, Sarah. You've become everything to me in a way I never thought possible. I don't know how to be the man you need me to be, but I do know this. I can't breathe without you." His words hit Sarah like a tidal wave, a flood of emotions rising within her. The man who had once exuded nothing but control was now laying himself bare in front of her, asking for something he had never asked of anyone. His vulnerability, his openness, shook her to her core. With shaking hands, Cole pulled out a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside, nestled against the rich fabric, was a diamond ring, a symbol of the life he wanted to build with her. "I love you, Sarah," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I need you to be with me now and forever. Will you marry me?" Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't expected him to ask. And yet here he was, vulnerable and open in a way that few people ever allowed themselves to be. Her hands trembled as she reached out, touching the ring in the box, her mind racing. It wasn't that she didn't love him. She did. She had never felt so connected to someone in her life. But she wasn't sure if marriage was the answer, not yet. Not when they still had so much to work through, so much to learn about each other. "Cole," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "I love you too. But I can't marry you yet. Not like this." His face fell, a flicker of hurt crossing his features. He opened his mouth to speak, but she placed a gentle hand on his, stopping him. "No," she said softly. "It's not that I don't want to be with you. I do. I want to be with you in every way possible. But I need to grow, Cole. I need to grow as a woman, as a professional. I need to feel like I'm not just your wife, but your equal, your partner." Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke, but she didn't look away from him. This was the truth she had been holding back, the truth she had to say aloud. "I don't want to be your property, and I don't want to be your prize. I want to be your lover, your partner, and only then your wife. But I need to know that I can still be me, that I can still be someone outside of you. I can't lose myself in this." Cole looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the fear that she might walk away, but also the understanding that he had to give her space to grow. She wasn't asking for an escape from him. She was asking for the freedom to be who she was, to find herself before committing to a future with him. "I want that for you too," Cole finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want you to lose yourself in this. I want you to be the woman you were meant to be. And if that means waiting until you're ready, then I'll wait. I'll walk with you every step of the way." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks now, not from sadness, but from the relief of hearing him say those words. It was everything she had wanted to hear. The man who had once sought to control her now understood that love wasn't about possession, it was about partnership, about mutual respect and growth. "Then yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you. When the time is right, when we are both ready." Cole's face lit up and he gently took her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger. It was a promise, one that wasn't about rushing into something, but about building something solid, something real. "I promise, Sarah," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I'll be right here with you. Not ahead of you, not behind you, but right beside you." And in that moment, Sarah knew that this wasn't the end of their journey. It was just the beginning. Together they would navigate the complexities of their love, the challenges that lay ahead. But they would do it as equals, as partners, and as two people who had finally found their way to each other. The months that followed were a journey neither Sarah nor Cole had expected, but both embraced with a sense of quiet understanding. The intensity of their passion still burned brightly, but now there was a shift, something deeper, something more rooted in respect, freedom, and trust. Sarah had found her voice, her place in the world, and she was no longer the woman who sought validation in the arms of another. She was the woman who sought her own truth, her own purpose. She immersed herself in her studies, devoting herself to her research, to her identity as a woman with dreams and ambitions that were entirely her own. No longer defined by her relationship with Cole, Sarah was carving a path that was uniquely hers. She found herself in the lecture halls, her mind alive with ideas, her heart alive with purpose. Her research, once a fleeting thought, had become a focal point of her life. Every day she grew stronger in her resolve, more confident in her ability to create something meaningful for herself. But even as her academic life flourished, Cole was never far from her thoughts. He had supported her, encouraged her, but most importantly, he had respected her choices. He had learned, as she had, that love didn't have to be all-encompassing. It could be empowering, a partnership rather than ownership. Cole, too, had undergone a transformation. The man who had once seen love as a means of control had come to understand its true essence. He no longer saw Sarah as someone to possess, but as someone to respect, cherish, and grow with. His work as CEO of his tech company continued to demand much of his time and attention, but he no longer felt the need to dominate every part of his life. With Sarah, he had found a balance, a space where love could exist without suffocating the other person. For the first time, he loved without the fear of losing himself, and he found freedom in that. They had learned that love wasn't about ownership. It wasn't about controlling the other person or demanding their time, attention, or affection. It was about giving each other the freedom to exist independently while sharing their lives together. It was about trust, vulnerability, and respect, building a partnership where both people could thrive as individuals, knowing that their connection would only grow stronger because of it. One afternoon, as Sarah sat at her desk, reading through her research notes, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Cole. "I'll be home late tonight, but I just wanted to remind you how proud I am of everything you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing, Sarah. I'll be here always." She smiled softly at the words, a warmth spreading through her chest. It wasn't the grand gestures that meant the most. It was the simple acknowledgements, the quiet support, the understanding that had made their relationship what it was now. It was a love rooted in freedom, trust, and the space to grow. That evening, when Cole came home, he found her still at her desk, focused on her work. As always, he stood for a moment in the doorway, watching her with a look of admiration in his eyes. She was the woman he had always known she could be, the woman he had fallen for, the woman who had proven to him that love was not about possession but about partnership. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Cole said, his voice soft, but the warmth behind it was unmistakable. "I just wanted to see you for a minute." Sarah looked up from her notes, her eyes meeting his with a smile that had become second nature. "I'm glad you did," she replied, pushing her chair back and standing up. "I was just finishing up some research, but now I'm ready to take a break." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. No words were necessary. They had both found something in each other, a connection that was deep and transformative. It was the kind of love that made each of them better, not by changing who they were, but by helping each other become the people they were meant to be. "Come here," Sarah said, her voice tender. "I need a hug." Cole didn't hesitate. He walked toward her, wrapping his arms around her with a sense of ease, of belonging. They stood there for a moment, wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside fading into the background. There was no rush, no pressure. There was only the quiet certainty that no matter what the future held, they would walk through it together, equally, with love, with respect. "I think we're getting this right," Sarah murmured, resting her head against his chest. "We are," Cole replied, his voice steady. "We're getting there." And for the first time, Sarah didn't feel the need to rush. There was no destination to reach, no perfect ending to find. They had already created something beautiful in the present, something that was constantly evolving, constantly growing. Their love was no longer about who held the power. It wasn't about controlling each other's lives or demanding anything. It was about creating a life together, one that allowed them both the space to be themselves, while still coming together in shared moments of intimacy, understanding, and passion. And as they stood there in the quiet of the evening, Sarah realized that love, true love, wasn't about keeping someone locked in a cage. It was about giving them wings, letting them soar, and knowing that when they returned, they would return to each other, stronger and more connected than before. Their journey was far from over, and the road ahead would bring challenges, no doubt. But Sarah and Cole were ready, because now they both understood that love with freedom, true love, was the most powerful force of all. Sarah and Cole learned in the hardest way that love is not built with chains, but with the freedom to be who we are, without the fear of losing ourselves in the other. They discovered that true connection doesn't require possession, but respect and space to grow. And in the end, they realized that by freeing themselves from the need to control, they found something far more powerful: mutual trust. After all, can love truly blossom without the weight of dominance? Or perhaps, by giving space to one another, we find the freedom to love each other fully. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments. Where are you listening from? Your support is what allows us to continue bringing stories like this.